The man WHO stole the sun. Chapter 1. The Rejected Child. In the winter of 1854 in Port Huron, Michigan, the wind howled through the loose window panes of the one-room schoolhouse, carrying the bone-chilling cold from Lake Huron inside. But for young Alva, or Al, as he was called, the cold outside was not nearly as terrifying as the cold gaze of his teacher, the Reverend Engel, staring straight at him. Al sat at the back of the class, his head seemingly too large for his scrawny body, his wide eyes open but apparently not looking at the blackboard. Inside his head, a different conversation was taking place, not about multiplication tables or grammar, but about why flames danced, and why a goose hatched eggs using body heat. Edison. Reverend Engel's shout tore through his train of thought. Al started, dropping his pencil onto the wooden floor with a dry clack. The whole class burst into laughter. The laughter felt like needles pricking his ears that had already begun to lose their sharpness following a bout of scarlet fever in his infancy. "Yes, sir?" Al stammered, bending down to retrieve his pencil. Reverend Engel marched down the aisle, his boots stomping heavily on the wooden planks. He was a severe man who believed in the discipline of the cane rather than patience. He stopped right at Al's desk, looking down at the boy with undisguised disgust. "I have explained this lesson 3 times, Thomas," the teacher said, emphasizing the birth name that few people used. "And you still sit there, mouth agape, eyes staring into the void. What does that head of yours contain? Sawdust?" Al shrank back. I was thinking about." "Thinking?" Engel sneered, turning to look at the class. "Master Edison is thinking." Class. A child who cannot even master the alphabet claims to be thinking. He whipped back around, leaning close to Al's face. "You are an addled child. Edison, your mind is broken. You are too stupid to learn anything here. Your presence only wastes my time and distracts the good students." Those words weighed as heavy as boulders on the 7-year-old's chest. Addled, stupid, broken. Al felt hot tears well up, blurring the image of the dusty classroom. He didn't understand why asking questions was wrong. He didn't understand why wanting to know the principles of things was considered being slow-witted. That afternoon, Al ran home faster than usual. He rushed into the arms of his mother, Mrs. Nancy Edison, and burst into uncontrollable sobs. Nancy, a woman with a gentle face but resolute eyes, wiped the tears from her son. She had once been a teacher, she understood the value of education. But she understood the value of a child's spirit even more. The teacher said, "I am addled." "Mother," Al hiccuped. He said, "I can't learn anything." Nancy's face hardened, not with anger at her son, but with a cold fury directed at narrow-mindedness. She took Al's hand. "Come with me, right now." They returned to the school. Nancy Edison stood before Reverend Engel, her small stature seeming to tower over the man holding the ruler. "You told my son he was addled?" Her voice rang out, clear and steely. "Mrs. Edison," Engel shrugged, "I only spoke the truth. The boy is distracted, asks askew questions, and is slow. He is not fit for schooling." "You are wrong," Nancy interrupted, her eyes blazing. "My son is not stupid. He is far more intelligent than you can imagine. His curiosity is a gift, not a burden. If you do not have the competence to teach him, then I will." She turned to Al, who was cowering behind her back, his eyes still red. She knelt down, looking straight into the boy's eyes, a look that Edison later said, "made me." "Al," she said, her voice softening but full of power. "Listen to me. You are not stupid. You have a special brain. And you will do great things that the people in this room cannot even imagine. I believe in you." In that moment, Thomas Edison's world changed. As they walked out of the school gates, leaving behind the drone of rote lessons, Al squeezed his mother's hand tightly. He felt a new current of energy flowing through him, not because he suddenly understood everything, but because he knew there was one person who believed in him absolutely. "Where will we study, Mother?" Al asked as they walked home. "Anywhere, Al," Nancy smiled, looking up at the gray winter sky. "The world is your classroom. And failure is only for those who accept giving up. As for you, you will never give up, will you?" No, never, Al whispered. In the family's small cellar, bottles and jars began to be arranged on shelves. The first experiments began to kindle. The child called, addled, began his journey to conquer knowledge. Not to prove the teacher wrong, but to prove his mother's faith right. Blank, underscore, blank. Chapter 2, Train Cars and Mobile Laboratories. The year was 1859. 5 years had passed since the day Nancy led Al away from the little schoolhouse. The addled boy was now 12 years old, but he no longer sat still in his basement at home. His world now stretched along the Grand Trunk Railway, running from Port Huron to Detroit. Every morning, before the fog had even lifted from the lake, Al was at the train station. The scrawny boy with the bright eyes had become a child businessman. He sold newspapers, candy, magazines, and fruit to sleepy passengers on the train. Al's voice was clear, mingling with the chug-chug of the train wheels grinding against the cold steel tracks. But Al didn't just sell goods. While other children used their earnings to buy toys or sweets, Al spent every penny buying chemicals from pharmacies in Detroit. And more importantly, he did something no one had dared to imagine. He turned a small corner of the dusty baggage car into his own private kingdom. It was a car that smelled strongly of coal smoke and dried fish. But to Al, it was paradise. In a corner hidden behind mail crates and sacks of luggage, he set up a mobile laboratory. Wooden shelves, vibrating violently with the rhythm of the train, held carefully labeled glass bottles, sulfuric acid, zinc, mercury, and even phosphorus. Careful there, Al, Mr. Stevenson, a kind old railway employee, often warned when he saw the boy busy mixing concoctions. Don't blow this train up. We're carrying passengers, not gunpowder. I know, Mr. Steve, Al grinned, his hand still holding a test tube swaying to the rocking of the train. I'm trying to create electricity from a new chemical reaction. Just you wait. One day I'll light up this whole car without needing oil lamps. For Al, the vibration of the train was not a hindrance, but a rhythm that helped him think. He even brought an old printing press bought from a scrap yard onto the train. Here, amidst the chaotic noise, the Weekly Herald was born, the first newspaper in the world to be written, printed, and published on a moving train. But fate always seems to want to test those who dare to dream. One late afternoon in 1862, the train was speeding over a rough section of track near Smith's Creek Station. Al was engrossed in an experiment with a stick of phosphorus, a chemical that is extremely flammable if exposed to air. Suddenly, the train lurched violently. A piercing screech rang out as the engineer slammed on the brakes to avoid an obstacle. The entire baggage car swayed. Wooden crates slid, and disaster struck. The jar containing the phosphorus slid off the shelf, fell to the wooden floor, and shattered. Instantly, flames erupted furiously. The phosphorus, meeting the air, caught fire like a demon, licking at the stack of old newspapers nearby. Toxic white smoke rose, blinding and choking. Fire! Fire! Al screamed, grabbing an old coat to try and smother the flames. But the more he beat it, the more the fire spread. The door to the baggage car burst open. The head conductor, a large man with a face red from anger and alcohol, rushed in. He saw the smoke, saw the boy Al coughing amidst the pile of broken bottles. "You damned brat," the man roared, his voice drowning out the train whistle. He lunged forward, not to help put out the fire, but to vent his rage. He grabbed Al by the collar, lifting him up like a sick cat, in his panic and extreme anger because the safety of the train was threatened. He did something cruel. He swung his hand, slapping the boy hard on the head. Once, then twice. The slaps landed like hammer blows directly on both sides of Al's ears. "Get out! Get off my train!" When the train stopped at Smith's Creek Station, the conductor threw all of Al's fortune onto the dusty platform. The precious bottles, the printing press, the stacks of newspapers, all were tossed out like garbage. And finally, he shoved Al, sending him stumbling onto the hard ground. Al looked up to watch the train roll away, leaving him stranded in the twilight. But something strange was happening. Al saw the conductor's mouth moving, Cursing, he saw the train whistle blowing white steam, he saw the wheels grinding on the tracks, but he didn't hear them clearly anymore. All sound seemed to be covered by a thick layer of cotton. The noisy bustle of the world suddenly receded, replaced by a piercing you, buzzing in his head. Blood trickled from his ears. That night, Al sat alone at the station, waiting for his family to pick him up. His world had changed forever. The damage to his inner ear, combined with the aftereffects of his childhood fever, had taken away most of his hearing. The 15-year-old boy touched his ear, feeling the silence enveloping him. A normal child might have collapsed. Expelled from school for being addled. Now fired, beaten, and deafened. The future seemed to have slammed its door in Al's face. But Alva Edison was not a normal child. He remembered his mother's words, "The world is your classroom." In that forced silence, Al suddenly realized something. He no longer heard the curses of drunkards. He was no longer distracted by birds singing or dogs barking. The silence, it was like a fortress wall protecting his mind. "I don't hear them," Al whispered, surprised that the sound of his own voice echoed in his head clearer than ever. "But I hear my own thoughts better." He picked up the shards of the bottles, wiped the dirt-stained printing press. A bold thought sprouted in the mind of the boy who had just been trampled by life. "If I cannot hear the world, I will force the world to listen to me." The loss of hearing was not the end. It was the beginning of Edison's superhuman ability to concentrate later in life. It turned him into a man who could sit for 18 hours straight staring at a light bulb filament without being disturbed by the noise of the outside world. As he stood up and dusted off his clothes, Al was no longer the mischievous newsboy. His gaze became calmer and deeper. He looked towards the endless tracks, where telegraph signals were running along the wooden poles. "Telegraph," he mumbled, "I will learn it, the language of dots and dashes. It doesn't need ears to hear speech, it needs feeling and logic." And so, from the ashes of the laboratory on the train car, a new chapter opened. The failure this time was physically painful, but it forged a spirit of steel. Al understood that, sometimes, to find the light, one must first learn to get used to the quiet of the darkness. __blank. Chapter 3. The Wizard of Menlo Park. Autumn, 1878. Menlo Park, New Jersey. This area, once just a desolate patch of land with a few poor farms, had now become the center of the world's attention. People flocked here, peering through the wooden fences, whispering to each other about the miracles happening inside that long, two-story building. They called the man inside the wizard. And indeed, Thomas Alva Edison, at the age of 31, looked more like a wizard than a dignified scientist. He often appeared in clothes stained with grease, his hair disheveled as if he had just been electrocuted, and his eyes shining with a mischievous brilliance. Since the invention of the phonograph, which could record and play back the human voice, something humanity considered magic, the name Edison had become a guarantee for the impossible. But tonight, the wizard was in trouble. Edison stood by the second-floor window of the laboratory, looking out at the pitch-black darkness covering the New Jersey countryside. Inside the room, gas lamps hissed with an annoying hiss, emitting a sickly yellow light that flickered and reeked of gas fumes. "The enemy," Edison muttered, squinting at the gas flame. "We are living in the age of steam and machines, yet we still have to light the night by burning fire like prehistoric men." He turned back, looking down at the workbench cluttered with blueprints and wires. On the table was a copy of the New York Herald with a massive headline, "Edison declares he will replace gas with electricity." That declaration had caused an earthquake. Stocks of gas companies in New York and London plummeted. The public waited joyfully for a miracle. Wealthy investors like J.P. Morgan had begun pouring money in. The only problem was, Edison still didn't know how to do it. Boss, Charles Batchelor, Edison's capable right hand, walked over, holding a strange device. "We failed again with the platinum regulator. It melted after just 10 minutes. Edison took the device, his calloused fingers grazing the coil of metal that had been melted into a distorted shape. The world at that time already knew of electric light. But it was the arc lamp, a blinding light created when electricity jumped across the gap between two carbon rods. It was as bright as the sun, as hot as a furnace, and suitable only for streetlights or lighthouses. Put it in a bedroom? It would roast people alive and blind anyone who looked at it. The problem Edison set for himself was to subdivide the light. He wanted to create a soft, safe lamp that could be turned on and off independently like a gas lamp, but cheaper and cleaner. Scientists in England say that subdividing light goes against the law of conservation of energy. Batchelor said, his voice worried. They call you a braggart. Al, Tyndall, Preece, all the top physics professors say you are banging your head against a wall. Edison snorted, tossing the broken device onto the table. His deafness made him miss some of Batchelor's lament, but he understood his colleague's meaning. Batch, Edison said, his voice louder than necessary, a habit of the deaf. They call me a braggart? Good. When people say something is impossible, that is when the game truly begins. He walked over to the dynamo lying dormant in the corner of the room. They think in the old ruts. They try to reduce the intensity of the arc lamp. Mistake. We don't need a smaller lightning bolt. We need something completely different. Edison grabbed a piece of chalk, drawing furiously on the blackboard. Resistance. He tapped the chalk hard, sending dust flying. The key is high resistance. We need a fragile filament, one that resists the current passing through it so it heats up red and glows. But it must not melt. But what material can withstand that temperature without burning? Batchelor asked, pointing to the pile of ruined platinum wire. Platinum is the most heat-resistant metal we know, and it has surrendered. Furthermore, it's more expensive than gold. We can't light the world with jewelry. Edison was silent. The vast laboratory sank into the hum of night insects. Mechanics, glassblowers, and mathematicians in his team were still working hard at nearby tables. They believed in him. The whole world believed in him. And the weight of that belief was pressing on his shoulders heavier than 1,000 tons of pressure. He had taken money from tycoons. He had promised the public he would light up New York by New Year's Eve. But currently, all he had was a pile of theories and coils of burned metal. Edison shoved his hand into his pocket, pulling out a half-chewed cigar. He looked around the lab, dubbed the Invention Factory. It had everything: horsehair, buffalo horn, rare metals, chemicals. He had once proudly declared that anything could be made here. Batch, Edison said, his eyes suddenly turning sharp and intensely focused. Forget platinum. Forget everything the textbooks say. What do you mean? If metal doesn't work, we will try non-metals. We will try everything on this earth. Thread, paper, wood, straw, anything that can be rolled into a strand. But boss, all those things will burn to ash instantly when they meet heat. Batchelor countered. Correct. Edison nodded, a half-smile appearing. It will burn if there is oxygen. Therefore, we will lock it in a vacuum. Francis Gell, a young assistant busy at the air pump, looked up, startled. Yes, sir? Prepare the best vacuum pump you have. We need to suck all the air out of the glass bulb. Not a single molecule of oxygen is allowed to remain. Edison turned back to Batchelor, his eyes burning with the fire of defiance. Tomorrow, we begin the greatest hunt in history. Batch, we will bake everything. If I have to try 10,000 materials to find one that stands the glow, I will do it. I won't let those gas sellers laugh at us. That night, Edison did not go home. He curled up on a hard laboratory table, using a few thick books as a pillow. In his fitful sleep, he dreamed of darkness being pushed back, not by the sun or fire, but by a tiny, fragile, yet resilient filament. He did not yet know that a true hell was waiting for him ahead. The bold declaration tonight would open the curtain for 14 months of continuous failure, of despair and exhaustion. The journey to find the 10,000 ways that won't work had officially begun. Blank, underscore, blank. Chapter 4. The Graveyard of Materials. The winter of 1879 arrived in Menlo Park with brutal severity. Snow fell thick, covering the fields of New Jersey, turning this isolated laboratory into a lonely island amidst a sea of white. But inside that two-story wooden building, the air was stiflingly hot, suffocating, and tense, like the inside of a pressure cooker about to explode. The floor was littered with broken glass shards, coated in pitch-black soot. It was the graveyard of hopes that had died young. 6 months had passed since Edison declared he would subdivide light. 6 months of sleepless nights. 6 months where the concept of time between day and night had been erased, leaving only the cycle: test, fail, test again. Number 2.457. Francis Gell's voice rang out hoarsely, breaking the heavy silence. The young man rubbed his red-rimmed eyes, his hand trembling as he wrote in a thick leather notebook. Hickory bark fiber. Result: burnt after 3 seconds. At the central workbench, Charles Batchelor, the man with the most dexterous hands in America, who could repair a watch while wearing boxing gloves, was holding his breath. Before him was a filament made of coconut fiber, thin as a spider's web, which had been baked into charcoal, carbonized, until it was jet black. Batchelor's task was to insert that fragile carbon thread into the glass bulb without breaking it. It was a job requiring the delicacy of a neurosurgeon. Edison stood right behind him, reeking of tobacco and chemicals, his eyes glued to Batchelor's hands as if trying to hypnotize them. Gently, Batch, Edison whispered, the sound like a whistling wind. It is a newborn baby. Don't hurt it. Batchelor was sweating profusely on his forehead despite the biting cold outside. He used tweezers to lightly clamp the carbon thread. His hand moved millimeter by millimeter. The carbon thread hovered, inching towards the platinum clamps inside the bulb. Snap. A tiny, crisp sound rang out. The carbon thread broke in two just as it touched the electrode. Batchelor dropped the tweezers onto the table, exhaled sharply, and buried his head in his hands. Good Lord, that's the 4th time today. I can't do it. Ow, my hands have no feeling left. The atmosphere in the room slumped. Disappointment spread like a plague. This wasn't the first time, nor the 100th. This was the 1000th time they had failed right before the finish line. The material, after being baked into carbon, became so brittle that a strong breath could blow it away, and a slight vibration of the floor when a train passed was enough to shatter it. Edison didn't comfort his friend. He didn't have time for sentimentality. He slapped Batchelor hard on the shoulder, a slap strong enough to make his partner jump. Don't blame your hands, Batch. The problem is the material. Coconut fiber has a longitudinal grain structure when carbonized. It doesn't bond tightly. We need something else. What else, Al? A harsh voice rang out from the corner. It was Upton, the German-trained mathematician who always kept a cool head but was now on the verge of a breakdown. We have tried paper, wood, cork, fishing line, cotton, flax, hemp. We even tried. Upton pointed to a glass jar containing a clump of black hair. That guy's hair. That was a story that brought tears of laughter last week. When Mackenzie, a friend, visited the lab, Edison had stared at his thick, red beard with a hungry look. Mac, Edison had said, give me a hair from your beard. And that hair, after being baked black, actually glowed brilliantly, for exactly 2 minutes before turning to ash. We haven't tried everything, Edison replied to Upton, his voice steely. The world is full of things containing carbon. Hay, straw, bamboo, every plant that grows from the earth could be the key. He turned, looking at the group of haggard men. They looked more like ghosts than scientists. Their clothes were stained with soot. Their faces smudged, their eyes sunken and dark. They ate dry bread right at their workbenches and slept fitfully on the floor or on hard wooden chairs. Listen, Edison raised his voice, trying to transmit his last bit of energy to them. I know you are tired. I am tired too, but think, the secret of light is hiding in a piece of bark, or some thread out there. It is challenging us to find it. We aren't going to let a blade of grass defeat human intelligence. Are we? He walked to the material cabinet, throwing the doors wide open. Inside were hundreds of small compartments containing all sorts of bizarre samples sent from all over the world. We will turn this place into a graveyard of plants if necessary. Edison declared. Francis, get me the silk from China. Batch, Rest for 15 minutes, then prepare the furnace. We will test at a higher temperature. That night continued in silent torture. The workflow was a brutal loop. 1. Crafting. Cutting the material into thin threads. Bending them into a horseshoe shape. 2. Carbonization. Placing them in a mold. Covering them with carbon powder. And baking in a furnace for hours to remove all volatiles, leaving only the carbon skeleton. 3. Assembly. Bachelor's nightmare stage, clamping the brittle carbon thread into the bulb. 4. Evacuation. Using the Sprengel vacuum pump. Mercury drip drip. Drip, for hours to push the air out. The sound of dropping mercury was the sound haunting their sleep. 5. Electrification. Closing the circuit and waiting. Tonight, the victim was silk. After 8 hours of preparation, the carbonized silk sat securely in the bulb. Francis Gell carefully operated the vacuum pump. The room was dead silent. Only the sound of falling mercury remained. Vacuum achieved, Gell whispered, afraid a loud voice would shatter the atmosphere. Edison placed his hand on the electric switch. Let's go. Current flowed through. The silk thread inside the bulb began to glow red. Cherry red, Bachelor announced. Increase voltage, Edison commanded. The silk turned orange-yellow. A soft light spread through the dark room, illuminating the smudged faces full of hope. It glows, a mechanic exclaimed. Don't celebrate yet. Edison stared unblinkingly. Hold voltage. 1 minute passed. 2 minutes. Then suddenly, a blue flash sparked inside the glass bulb. Pop. The bulb went dark. The thread had snapped. A collective sigh rang out like the deflation of a giant balloon. The disappointment this time was heavy. 10 times worse than the last. Upton threw his notebook onto the table. It's useless. 3.000 samples. Edison. 3.000. The laws of physics cannot be bent. Carbon is too brittle to be a filament. We are banging our heads against a wall. Edison stood silent in the darkness that had just rushed back in. He looked at the useless bulb on the table. Inside his head was not despair, but a cold analysis. Why did it break? Oxygen residue? Or uneven silk structure? He turned to Upton, who was packing his things to leave. Upton, Edison called. I'm going home. Al, I need sleep. I cannot take another failure. Upton said without turning his head. We didn't fail. Edison's voice rang out, strangely calm amidst the chaos. Upton froze. Edison stepped forward, picked up the broken bulb, and held it high like a trophy. What do you see here? Upton? A corpse? No, I see data. We now know for certain that silk at a baking temperature of 2000 degrees Celsius does not work. That is knowledge we did not have yesterday. He set the bulb down, his fiery eyes sweeping over everyone. That pile of trash out there. He pointed out the window, where thousands of failed samples were piled up. That is not trash. That is a map. Every time a material doesn't work, it erases a wrong path on this maze map. And if we erase all the wrong paths, the remaining path, no matter how strange, must be the right one. But how many more wrong paths are there? Bachelor asked, his voice weary. Maybe 1,000, maybe 10,000. Edison shrugged, then smiled, the smile of a gambler betting everything he had. But the good news is the number of materials in the world is finite. We just need to be more patient than that list. Now then, Edison clapped his hands. Someone get me the spool of cotton sewing thread from my wife. I just thought of a new way to bake it. The associates looked at each other. They were tired. They wanted to quit. They thought their boss was a madman. But then, one by one, they returned to their positions. Bachelor picked up the tweezers. Gell picked up the notebook again. Because at Menlo Park, under the command of the wizard, giving up was the only true failure. Everything else was just a painful stepping stone to glory. Blank, underscore, blank. Chapter 5. Redefining Failure. October, 1879. Public pressure had reached its peak. The articles praising the Wizard of Menlo Park a year ago had now changed their tune. They began calling him a fraud, a delusional dreamer, or worse, a washed-up genius. On a rainy afternoon, Walter Mallory, a veteran reporter for a major New York newspaper, made the trek to Menlo Park. He brought with him not only a notebook and fountain pen but also the skepticism of society. Mallory walked into the lab, wrinkling his nose at the acrid smell of acid and the burnt scent of failed experiments. He saw Edison sitting in a corner, holding a half-eaten ham sandwich, surrounded by the clutter of thousands of shards. Edison looked 10 years older than his photos in the papers, hair and beard stubbly, clothes disheveled, and dark circles under his eyes like a raccoon. "Mr. Edison," Mallory spoke up, his voice tinged with condescension. "Have I come to write the obituary for your electric light project?" Edison looked up, swallowing the last of his sandwich, his eyes narrowing at the uninvited guest. He cupped his hand to his ear, signaling Mallory to speak louder. "I said," Mallory shouted, "rumor has it you have spent $40,000 of investors' money and the result is a big fat zero. Is it time to admit failure?" The air in the room grew heavy. Francis Gell and the other assistants stopped working, looking anxiously at their boss. They feared Edison would lose his temper. $40 was a fortune at the time, equivalent to $1 million today. And having no commercial product was a painful blow. But Edison wasn't angry. He calmly wiped his hands on a grease-stained towel, then stood up and walked over to Mallory. "Young man," Edison said, his voice raspy but calm, "how do you define zero?" Mallory pointed to the mountain of broken filaments piled high in the corner, what they called the graveyard. "That," Mallory sneered, "thousands of experiments, thousands of materials, platinum, nickel, silk, hair, all did not work. You have worked for 14 months and you are still at the starting line. Is that not failure? Is that not a terrible waste of time and money?" Edison smiled, a mysterious smile that unnerved Mallory. He walked to that pile of trash, picking up a crumbled piece of carbon. "You see a pile of trash," Edison said. "I see a treasure trove of knowledge that no university in the world can teach you." He turned to look straight into Mallory's eyes, his gaze sharp as a razor. "You ask if I have failed? No, my friend, I have never failed. I have simply found 10,000 ways that the light bulb will not work." Mallory was stunned. He had never heard anyone defend their defeat so arrogantly. "That is just wordplay, sir," Mallory countered. "The result is still that the bulb does not light." "Wrong," Edison interrupted, his voice full of passion. "The result is that I have eliminated 10,000 wrong possibilities. Imagine invention is like finding a way out of a dense forest in the dark. Every time I hit a dead end and turn back, I have not wasted time. I have marked on the map, do not go this way. And every time I mark a wrong path, I move closer to the only correct path left." Edison walked to the blackboard, drawing a large circle. "The world is finite, Mallory. The number of chemical elements is finite. The number of heat-resistant materials is finite. Failure is not falling down. Failure is data. Every time a filament burns out, it tells me about melting points, oxidation, resistance. Those corpses over there are talking to me, telling me where to go next." He patted the shoulder of the dumbfounded reporter. "Many people give up when they are just 1 inch from the finish line, simply because they think difficulty is a sign they are on the wrong path. No, difficulty is a sign that we are eliminating the easy and useless things. I am not discouraged, because every wrong attempt discarded is another step forward." Mallory silently closed his notebook. He had come here to write about a loser. But he suddenly realized he was standing before a giant of thought. This man did not live in the same reality as ordinary people. To Edison, the word failure did not exist in the dictionary. It was replaced by the term process of elimination. When Mallory left, Edison stood silently by the window. Rain was still falling heavily. The confidence he showed the journalist was real, but the fatigue in his bones was also real. He turned back to look at his team. Haggard faces were looking at him, waiting. They had heard the conversation, and strangely, shoulders that were slumping suddenly straightened a little. "Boss is right," Batchelor mumbled, turning back to the furnace. "We have eliminated all metals. We have eliminated all artificial fibers. Now the list is much shorter. Edison walked to his desk. He picked up the spool of white cotton sewing thread, the thing he had taken from his wife Mary's sewing basket. A thought flashed in his mind, powerful as a lightning bolt. Why did the previous filaments break? Because they were too hard and brittle when carbonized. Why did they burn? Because there was still a tiny amount of oxygen. But more importantly, their structure. Cotton thread. It is pure cellulose. Its fibers twist together naturally, creating a durable structure even when burned into charcoal. 10.000 wrong ways, Edison murmured, fingering the fragile thread, and the 10.001 stoneway is in my hand right here. He looked up, shouting, "Batch, Francis, forget all the complicated stuff. We go back to the most basic things. This cotton thread, I want you to bake it. But this time, bake it in a horseshoe mold. Pack the carbon powder tight so it doesn't deform. And bake it for 10 hours for me." 10 hours? Francis exclaimed. "It will turn to dust." "Do it," Edison commanded, eyes blazing. That is the command of the data. The laboratory door closed, locking the resilient men inside. Outside, Mallory's article would soon be published. But it would not be an obituary. It would be a forecast of a storm of light about to sweep through humanity. They did not know that the ordinary cotton thread in Edison's hand was the key to opening the door of the 20th century. But to make it a reality, they still had to go through one final night of destiny, a night of the ultimate test between the life and death of an idea. Blank, blank. Chapter 6. The Carbon Thread. October 21st, 1879. If someone were to walk into the Menlo Park laboratory at this moment, they would think they had stumbled into a strange religious ritual. All windows were sealed tight to block drafts. Large men walked on tiptoes. No one dared to speak loudly, no one even dared to breathe heavily. The center of attention was a tiny nickel mold lying on the workbench. Inside lay their last hope, a piece of ordinary cotton sewing thread, which had been baked in the furnace for 14 hours to turn into charcoal, carbon. "Is it cool yet?" Edison asked, his voice a whisper but full of impatience. "Yes, boss," Batchelor replied, wearing a magnifying loupe, sweat beading on his forehead. This was the moment of truth. The carbonization process had turned the soft white thread into a skeletal black carbon frame. Theoretically, it had extremely high heat resistance. But physically, it was more brittle than an eggshell, more fragile than a butterfly's wing. One slight touch at the wrong angle, and it would crumble into black dust. Batchelor used a special pair of tweezers, slowly opening the mold lid. Inside, the carbon thread lay curved in a horseshoe shape, pitch black and perfect. "Beautiful," Francis Gell exclaimed. "Focus," Edison reminded. "Now is the hardest part. Get it into the clamp." Batchelor inserted the tip of the tweezers, clamping the two ends of the carbon thread. He held his breath, lifting it from the mold. The carbon thread left the table surface, hovering in the air. Snap! A tiny sound rang out. The carbon thread broke in half in midair. It fell to the table, shattering into 3 pieces. Batchelor closed his eyes, gritting his teeth. The whole room let out a long sigh. 14 hours of waiting had vanished into smoke in 1 second. "Don't lose heart," Edison's voice rang out immediately, cutting through the disappointment threatening to surge. "Get another spool. Bake it again. We need to make more molds at once." The next 3 days were a true nightmare. They worked like shuttles, winding thread, packing carbon powder, baking, cooling, and breaking. The carbon thread broke as soon as it was taken out of the mold. It broke when Batchelor's hand trembled slightly. It broke when a draft blew through a crack in the door. Once, when the carbon thread was almost installed in the holder, a mechanic shouted, "Got it, enjoy." And the breath from that shout blew the filament into dust. It's like trying to thread a needle while riding a galloping horse. Batchelor lamented on the second night. His eyes blurred from strain. His fingers were numb, devoid of feeling. Edison looked at his most loyal associate. He knew Batchelor had the most skilled hands in the world. If Batchelor couldn't do it, no one could. But he also knew they were on the right track. The carbon threads, though broken, had perfect structures and weren't deformed. Batch. Edison put a hand on his friend's shoulder. Get some sleep. When the new molds come out of the furnace, I'll call you. We can't let trembling hands spoil the work. In the early morning of the 21st, the final batch came out. This time, they had 3 intact filaments. Bachelor, after napping for 2 hours, had regained his composure. He sat before the workbench, took a deep breath, and began the grueling, surgical procedure again. First attempt, broke while clamping into the platinum holder. Second attempt, broke while moving to the glassblowing table. Only one remained, a single fragile thread lying in the mold. If this one broke, they would lose another 14 hours to bake a new batch. Absolute silence. Everyone literally held their breath. Bachelor lifted the carbon thread. This time, his movements were as fluid as water. The filament glided through the air, gently landing in the 2 platinum clamps. Clamp, Edison commanded with his eyes. Bachelor tightened the screws gently. The filament vibrated, then stood still. It was fixed. But it wasn't over. Now they had to insert that entire mount inside the narrow glass bulb. Any scrape against the glass wall would ruin their efforts. Edison held the glass bulb, keeping it steady. Bachelor held the mount. 2 men, 2 heads together, coordinated rhythmically like 2 circus artists walking on a wire. It's in, Bachelor whispered. Lower, a little more. Edison adjusted. Got it. The mount sat snugly inside the glass bulb. The horseshoe-shaped carbon thread remained intact, jet black, standing proudly in the transparent space. Immediately, Boehm, the glassblower, took over. He used a spirit lamp flame to seal the mouth of the bulb, leaving only a small hole to suck out the air. Francis Gell immediately connected the bulb to the Sprengel vacuum pump. The mercury began to drop drip, drip, drip. It was the sound of hope, but also the sound of torture. The evacuation process lasted for hours. They needed to reach a near absolute vacuum, with only 1/1,000,000th of the air remaining inside. If any oxygen remained, the thread would burn instantly. The clock struck 1 a.m., then 2 a.m., then 3 a.m. Edison did not take his eyes off the bulb. He sat there, like a statue, guarding his brainchild. By late afternoon on October 21st, Francis Gell announced, "Vacuum achieved." "Sir." Edison stood up. Fatigue seemed to vanish. He looked around the room. Familiar faces. Bachelor, Upton, Gell, Boehm. They had walked through the hell of failure with him. They had witnessed thousands of corpses of materials. And now, before them was a burnt black cotton thread, the most ordinary thing in the world. Placed in the most honored position, Edison put his hand on the electric switch. "Gentlemen," his voice rang out, warm and solemn, "we have tried 10.000 wrong ways. We have walked down 10.000 dead ends. And if God is willing, this is the right path." He took a deep breath and closed the circuit. Current flowed through the wires, rushing into the fragile carbon thread. In a split second, the whole room fell silent, waiting for the familiar pop of failure. But there was no explosion. Instead, the thread began to glow red. Then it turned orange, and finally, it flared up with a brilliant yellow color, soft and steady. The darkness in the corner of the room was pushed back. The faces of Edison and his associates lit up under the lamp. Not the blinding, flickering light of arc lamps. Not the sickly, trembling yellow of oil lamps or gas. It was the light of stability. The light of the sun shrunk into the palm of a hand. "It glows," Bachelor whispered, tears welling in his dark-circled eyes. "It really glows, Al." Edison said nothing. He just smiled, staring at the tiny halo. But in his head, he knew the war wasn't over. Lighting up was one thing. How long it survived was another. "Don't turn it off," Edison ordered. "Francis, increase the voltage. We will see how long this lady can last. Tonight, no one sleeps." And so, the death watch began. Blank, blank. Chapter 7. The Undying Light. The night passed slowly like thick honey. Outside the window of the Menlo Park laboratory, the crickets had fallen silent. yielding to the absolute stillness before dawn. But inside, time seemed to have frozen around a single point of light. The incandescent bulb, with the black cotton thread inside, was still glowing. 1 hour passed, then 2 hours, 3 hours. Francis Gell had fallen asleep right on the recording table, his head resting on the leather notebook. Bachelor, though exhausted, still sat on the stool, his red eyes staring at the bulb as if afraid that if he blinked, the magic would disappear. Edison did not sit. He paced around the table, hands clasped behind his back, stepping lightly so as not to create vibrations. Every time he passed the bulb, he glanced at the pendulum clock on the wall, then at the fragile filament glowing red. 6 hours. Al, Bachelor whispered, his voice hoarse from smoke and fatigue. It has broken all our records. Not enough, Edison replied, not stopping his pace. It must live through tonight. It must prove it is stronger than the darkness. When the first rays of October 22nd feebly pierced the New Jersey fog, shining into the window, a strange scene unfolded. The cold gray-blue light of dawn flooded the room, meeting the warm, steadfast yellow light of the bulb. It was a meeting between nature and man. For the first time in history, an artificial lamp did not bow down and fade before the sun. Francis Gell woke with a start. Rubbing his eyes, he looked at the bulb, then shouted, "It's still on. Good God, it's still on." Gell's shout woke the whole lab. Mechanics rubbed their eyes and sat up. Boehm ran in from the glassblowing room. Everyone gathered around the round table. 7 a.m., 8 a.m., 10 a.m. The tiny bulb had become a living creature. It was no longer an inanimate object. It was proof of Edison's stubbornness. It challenged the law of decay. Edison finally sat down. He pulled a chair close to the bulb, resting his chin on his hand. Looking at it, in that soft aura, he did not see carbon thread, he saw the past. He saw the image of 7-year-old Al, tears in his eyes, walking out of the Port Huron school gates. His small hand nestled in his mother's warm hand. "Mom, the teacher said I was addled." "No, Al, you are not addled. You will do great things." Nancy Edison had passed away in 1871. 8 years before this moment occurred. She never got to see this light. But Edison believed that, somewhere, she was smiling. "Do you see, Mother?" Edison whispered, tears misting his eyes but a smile blooming on his lips. "I didn't fail. I was just a little more stubborn than failure." By early afternoon, the bulb had burned continuously for 13.5 hours. Finally, at a little past 1 p.m., a gentle snap was heard. The filament, having exhausted all its strength to shine, broke and faded. The bulb went dark. Silence enveloped the room, but this time, there were no mournful sighs. There was no disappointment. No one dropped their head to the table. Bachelor stood up, stretching his limbs, joints cracking. He looked at Edison, beaming radiantly. "It died," Bachelor said. "No, Batch." Edison jumped up, eyes burning with more enthusiasm than ever. "It was just born. 13.5 hours means our principle is correct. If it can burn for 13 hours, I will make it burn for 100 hours. 1.000 hours." He clapped his hands loudly, shattering the silence. "Boehm, make more glass bulbs. Francis, prepare the pump. Batch, we will try a longer, tighter twisted cotton thread. The game has only just begun." In the days that followed, Menlo Park became the epicenter of the world. Edison did not stop. He continued to perfect it, finding carbonized cardboard that helped the bulb burn for 40 hours, and then Japanese bamboo fiber that helped the bulb burn for thousands of hours. The news spread like wildfire. Gas stocks collapsed. On New Year's Eve that year, a special train carrying thousands of people from New York and Philadelphia poured into Menlo Park just to admire the miracle. They saw street lamps glowing in the falling snow. They saw the laboratory shimmering like a fairy tale castle. They gaped in amazement at the light that had no smoke, no flame, soft and safe. Amidst the cheering crowd, Walter Mallory, the skeptical reporter from before, found Edison standing quietly leaning against a lamppost. "Mr. Edison," Mallory said, his voice full of respect, without a hint of sarcasm, I owe you an apology. And the world owes you the light. Edison smiled, adjusting the brim of his hat. You owe me nothing, Mallory, but remember what I told you about that pile of material trash. Mallory nodded, pulling out his notebook. About the 10.000 failures? Correct. Edison looked up at the lamp shining above his head. Never call it failure. I did not fail. I just found 10.000 ways the light bulb would not work. And it was thanks to eliminating those 10.000 ways that I found the 10.001 stone way, the way to bring the sun into the night. Blank, underscore, blank. Many years later, when Thomas Edison passed away, the entire United States turned off their lights for 1 minute to mourn him. In that 1 minute, the world sank back into the darkness of the 19th century, so humanity could clearly understand the value of the gift he had bestowed. But Edison's greatest gift was not the light bulb, the phonograph, or the motion picture camera. The greatest gift he left behind was an attitude towards life. It was the ironclad belief that, in the dictionary of those who dare to change the world, there is no word, failure. Only the words, not yet successful. The shards, the piles of ash, the wrong numbers, all are just rough steps. If you are stubborn enough to keep walking, they will lead you to the stars. And the light from that fragile filament that day at Menlo Park still burns. Not just in houses, but in the heart of anyone standing before adversity and telling themselves, I will try one more time. Thank you for listening. Please like and subscribe so you don't miss any meaningful stories.